Good morning. Oh my God, what a mess. All right.
I'm in Amsterdam, which is without a doubt the
Let's go ahead and skip the ad here. And we'll get started. I want to thank those of you who are already on the live stream. Good morning, Candi. Hey, Allie, Patton, and Denny. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for hanging in there, especially after, hey, Cesar and Jerry. Hey, Jerry. Daryl, Brandon, Phoenix Suns. Good morning. Brian Pierce, hello. Andy G. TG, good morning to you. And thank you for all of you who are on the line right now. Cichlid Guru, love that name. Sean Barwell, hello from the UK, my friend across the pond. Looks like Shogun, Diane, Ali. Okay, good. We've got good sound, good picture. Okay, but as you know, nothing is guaranteed in the live stream world. Good morning to all of you. And let's go ahead and jump right into it with the usual shout outs. I would like to go ahead and acknowledge my moderators, Candi, who is the magician, the moderator magician, and of course Kevin and Denny. I have the best moderators on YouTube. Thank you so much, the three of you, for your help. And I'd also like to do a real quick shout out to the super chats. Now I had to kind of reconstruct the super chats because I ended up taking the last live stream off, cutting out the part where there was me walking around the house because we had lost the signal, and then putting it back up. So for some reason it lost the chat. It lost the chat that follows along with the live stream. So I went in there and I had to kind of reconstruct it. But these are some recent super chats, and I just want to shout out to them. Soren Abelgard, and thank you so much for that live chat that you did. Unfiltered Aquarius, you've been a fan for a while. I appreciate that. Cesar Sosa, always coming through, my friend. You're very appreciated. Alan Wilson, thank you so much for your super chat. HV8019, and those were the super chats that I could reconstruct from the last live stream, and maybe one before because I was using a general list. But thank you so much to those folks who did that. By the way, the record so far for super chats is $20, and so I'm going to play a little game. Whoever gets the highest super chat today, that sets a new record. I'm going to send them out one of these cups, and so this is one of my ben.o. Man, that coffee is hot. It's one of my ben.o.cichlid cups, and I will send that out to anybody who breaks. To anyone who is the highest super chat that breaks Docker Jade's $20 record. Docker Jade has the record here for, so just a free cup, a little freebie, just for me saying thank you for your support of the channel. I hope you're having coffee wherever you are. Maybe if you're in the UK, you're having tea. But this is Coffee and Cichlids. Another shout out to Christopher Martin. Did you folks see the artwork that was done by Christopher Martin? He did this cichlid holding a cup of coffee, and he emailed it to me, and I thought that was very nice of him, very cute. I really liked it a lot. And thank you, Christopher Martin. A big shout out to you, my friend. I really appreciate when people do stuff like that completely just out of the goodness of their heart, with nothing expected in return. It's a true generous act. So let's get right into it. I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of filtration. And for those of you who have been following the channel, you've seen I put out a few little filtration videos. they seem to really get a lot of traction. People obviously like discussions about filtration. The 10 tips about filtration, and even the Sump. I didn't think that the Sump video would get that much traction. Hey, Paul, Inventory King. Hey, buddy. For those of you who love my Meduca white lips, I got them from Paul, the Inventory King. I don't think he's selling them anymore. So, but at any rate, so I didn't think that the Sump would get that kind of traction, because it's a little bit more of a select group, but it's actually getting a lot of views, and so I think people are getting interested in Sumps. And but let's dial filtration way back, and let's start with an undergravel filter. If you have an undergravel filter and are willing to step up and admit that you have one, because I know people with them get attacked sometimes. Oh, what are you doing running an undergravel filter? If you have one, mention it in the chat. I'd love to hear how you're using it, what you think about it. And I used undergravel filters many years ago, probably before a lot of you on this live stream were born. I was using an undergravel filter, and the big advantage of that. Thank you, Cesar, my friend, Cesar Sosa, amigo, gracias. So the advantage of them, of course, is that they pull detritus down into the substrate, where you can get this bacteria, sort of living and thriving, and you can get this. Like if you see some aquariums, they have these very thick beds. They have these very big, thick, sand or gravel beds. And thank you, J Rock, and it's my pleasure to help you. And they have these thick, these thick beds of gravel or sand, and so underneath there's a lot of great beneficial bacteria that's living. And so those undergravel filters that were powered really just by an air pump that was just creating upward pressure through the tubes, and then just sucking detritus down. So they were very good for plants, because they were feeding those plants with that detritus that that was being pulled down. So that was the plus point. The plus point on those was the fact that they did that they could feed the plants, and that they could create a good bacteria ecosystem underneath the substrate. And there are a lot of folks out there that have messaged me that tell me that they still are using undergravel filters with great success. So of course, these days the problem is if you can even find one, and I imagine you could DIY one if you wanted to. I think they became unpopular because, and this is the con, here's the downside, right? They became unpopular because they're just a pain in the rear to service. You try and service one of those, and you essentially have to pull everything out of the tank and kind of lift this large, this large plate out of the bottom of your tank, and then when you put it back in, you've got to make sure that there's nothing under it, and move all the gravel to one side, and so I think that eventually turned people off to them because it's very labor intensive, and so those are the undergravels. The pro and cons, in my opinion, of an undergravel filter. If you're using one, I'd love to hear your take on it, either in the comments here or after this video posts. I would love to hear how that is. And it looks like, hey, Francie, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you can multitask. And now the next filtration system that I want to touch on lightly is, of course, sponge filters. Sponge filters are, I think they're underrated. They're very inexpensive, relatively speaking. They are unbelievably easy to service. What do you do with a sponge filter? You pull it out of the tank, and I've heard people leave them in there for very long periods of time. You can pull it out of the tank, put it into a bucket of tank water, give it a few squeezes, and put it back in. maybe run a pipe cleaner, down the tube or through the tubing, or just to clean that up a little bit. But we're talking about a 5-minute, maybe 10-minute process, and you're done with the servicing of your sponge filter. I'm going to be keeping a sponge filter in the sump behind me. Reason being is that I've moving a lot of media or substrate to set up a quarantine tank on the fly is more labor intensive than simply pulling out an established sponge filter in a sump, or even if you don't have a sump, you can have it in another tank, like have a little small one tucked behind some decor, and that thing becomes full of beneficial bacteria. Get your little 10-gallon, a little 5-gallon, fill it up with tank water, or fill it up with some water, then treat that water, drop your sponge in, and you have an instantly cycled and ready to accept fish tank. So a sponge filter has that enormous advantage. So cost and maintenance and the ability to be used for an instant cycle tank makes a sponge filter, in my opinion, a real smart way to go. Certainly to have a spare. What's the downside? Well, the downside on a sponge filter, in my opinion, is that aesthetically they're a bit ugly. I mean, if they're doing their job, you're going to have a big ball of poop in your aquarium. I mean, they're just going to sit there and they're going to gather stuff, and you're going to have this sort of ugly monument in your tank. Now, you can put some decor around it, and but you don't want to hide it too much, because it's going to defeat the purpose of it being able to draw in and pull in the waste and other products. So you want to have it fairly accessible to everything within the tank. So if you don't mind this sort of glob in the tank, so aesthetically, that would be the only downside on a sponge filter, aesthetically. But the plus points, if you simply do it as a 2-column plus point, bad point, good point, the good points far outnumber the bad points. And so a sponge filter is, especially when you consider cost. How many sponge filters can you buy for the price of one Fluval FX6? Who's got a calculator? 100 sponge filters? You could do your whole fish room. Okay. So let's talk about hang-on backs. Hang-on backs, I think they're 200. Thank you. Someone came up with 200. Very, very good. 200. Got some people out there with calculators or sharp minds. The hang-on back filter is, in a lot of ways, especially for the medium-sized tank, I think is just a great way to go. And I'll tell you why. And first of all, depending on the type of hang-on back, and some of them out there are pretty hefty, right? And you folks know the ones I'm talking about. Go ahead and list them on there. Fluval makes one. There's an 110, the AC 110. There's ones that have big. If someone says it sucks, it does. Sucks the water up, and no, it sucks. Everybody's had good experiences and bad experiences with these filters, right? But the thing I like about these hang-on back filters is they're so easy to access. I mean, you essentially unplug them, and they're usually at chest level or chin level, or depending how you have your tank set up, and you just reach in and pull out and do what you need to do, and then just drop back in and you're done. I mean, so they're a very easy system to work on. They don't take any space up in the tank, except for your output and your input or intake pipe or hose. Those are the only impact it has on the tank with regards to aesthetics, and those can be sometimes hidden. Yeah, thank you, Francie. You get my humor, right? They do suck. All filters suck, unless they're broken. So the HOBs do one, very easy to work on. Two, you can customize them. And I don't have any hang on back that I haven't torn apart and put back together in a way that I wanted to put back together. And just this is just my opinion. Whether you follow this or not that's always your call, right? But I avoid purchasing the cartridges that are recommended by the manufacturer, because very often that's where they make their money. It's like when you buy a printer. You get the printer is like, hey, look, we can get a Hewlett-Packard printer, or an Epson, or we can buy a printer for $29 after the rebates. Hey, great deal. Well, guess what? Your ink cartridges are going to cost $35, and you need one probably at least once a month. That's where they make the money. So a lot of these HOBs, hang-on backs, make their money. I think that the actual unit itself, to some degree, is a loss leader, and they make their money on the cartridges. Now, I'm not against people making money. I think people should be prosperous and stuff. But if you can come up with a way to leave a little dough in your pocket and still get a comparable or better result, why not? So what I do with my hang-on backs is I just, I go online, I buy some pond filters, some of those egg crate pond filters, and I cut them and I drop them in, and that's it. Even on that little, I have a little Aqueon 5-gallon that comes with this little snap-on hang-on. It's not even a hang-on back; it's hang-in-the-side filter. It's a little Aqueon thing, and even those little cartridges I threw them out, and I put some sponges in there, and does a great job. Keeps the little 5-gallon clean, and so flexibility, easy to work on them. Another reason I love hang-on back filters is that they break up the surface. So you don't really need necessarily, unless you want to or like the look of it or anything, you don't necessarily need a bubbler or a power head pointed to the surface. You don't, because that cascading water dropping into the tank from the hang-on back is going to be breaking up that surface tension and allowing a lot of oxygen to get into your tank, which is vital. Especially if you get bigger fish, okay? Bigger fish. Francie, that 5-gallon is something that I bring into play when a fish needs to be given a timeout or put into a very fast quarantine. I pull the 5-gallon, I think it's might be a 10-gallon. I pull it out of the garage, give it a rinse, and drop some media into it and fill it up, and that's what I do. Okay, so now for those of you who joined a little late, we are doing a game with the super chats. The record for super chats is 20. If anybody breaks that record, the highest super chat over 20 is going to get a free mug sent to them if they're in the United States. I can't send them abroad because it would cost me $100 to ship them. Just a little game, just a little thank you to you super chatters out there who support the channel. So what's the downside for me? The downside on hang-on back filters, the only downside for me has been noise. I've used certain, now some of them rest a little lower on the inside of the tank than others. And with those, if you have your water line pretty maxed out, that can quiet it down a little bit. But I've had hang-on back filters be a bit noisy, when they're moving a lot of water. There was this one that I used for a short period, and I can't remember if it was an Aqueon or API. Anyway, it was like a Series 90. It was this massive. If you go back into my old videos, you can see that when I first set up my 60-gallon, I had two of these massive hang-on back filters, and it was like being next to a waterfall. And so I had to turn the TV way up, and so I switched. That's what moved me into canisters after watching a video by Jay Wilson, where he was comparing a Fluval to a Sun. I ordered up a couple Suns and put them on that 60, and this is like 5 years now, and it's never been a problem. So thank you for that. Thank you for that super chat, Francie. Much appreciated. I really appreciate that. That was that. Let me see, Ben, for celebrating an Ohio State touchdown. All right, Ohio State. So let's see here. So that's my take on hang-on back filters. And now let's talk a little bit about canisters. Canisters is what I switched to when I left hang-on back filters. The canisters, I did it for one reason. I did it for noise. I was getting too much noise at the time, and so I put a couple canisters on that 60. We're going back like 5 years. Those canisters, by the way, those two Sun 302Bs are still running. They're still running quietly, perfectly, without any issues whatsoever. I've never had to replace a seal on them. The little tab that you use to push up to stop the water flow, that broke. You know, it's a thin plastic tab that broke on me, so I have to get in there and pinch it and kind of move it up. It takes a little bit of force. But for what I paid, I don't know what I paid, $30, $40 originally for those each. And I've had 5 years of continuous, quiet use out of both of them. I was watching Corey's live stream the other night, and he mentioned he's not real big on Sun. He thinks they're very cheap. Cheap plastic. I think a lot of folks feel that way about Sun, and I've had no problem. And the 704B is pretty thick. It's a thick, and I haven't tried the 5000, the Sun 5000. The 704B is a pretty substantial, pretty heavy-duty plastic. I think you'd have to drop it very hard to get a crack in it. And, but Corey says he doesn't want to cut corners, what he considers cutting corners, and so he's not big on the Suns. I respect him. We're all entitled to our own opinion. Hey, King and Queen. Good to see you here, King and Queen Cichlids. So that's my take on the HOBs, but on canisters, I want to say a few more things. The thing I love about canisters is you can get a lot into them. You can put a lot, you can stack, and it's easy to line up media in a way that that is to your liking. You can, if once you know the water flow, if you watch my filtration 10 tips video, the first point was know the flow, right? Know the flow of your filter. So if you know the flow of the filter, it's very easy to line things up in a way that is the way you want them to line up. In my case, right? Coarse, medium, and fine egg crate sponges, and then maybe some floss just to give the water a final polish before it runs over the biological media. And then your biological media, whatever it is you want to use, right? Marine Pure, Biohome, Scrubbies, whatever. And then if you want to use chemical, charcoal, Purigen, whatever, I put that as the final step before it goes to the tank. So it's real easy to line things up like that with a canister. So that's a big plus, and you can usually get a lot of media into them. The 704B has a tremendous amount of space in those baskets. So you can get a lot into that. I think you can get a lot more I think I did a side-by-side comparison, and because of those massive sponges on the outside of the Fluval FX6, the 704B actually held almost like a basket or a basket and a half more bio than the FX6. Now, disadvantage on most canisters is that what they tell you they push, the gallons per hour, is usually way off, because they test those canisters, they test them empty. So they just measure the motor, the pump, they just measure that thing and go, oh, it's pushing 350 gallons an hour or 400 gallons an hour. Throw that on the box. Well, you put some sponges and media in there, some floss, some pinky, well, you're down to 200 gallons an hour. And one of the best tips I heard under the best tips, and I'll touch on this later, but the filtration tips video, one of the best tips was take the volume that is stated on the box of the canister and cut it in half, because that's probably where you're going to honestly end up. So if you have a 100-gallon aquarium and it says, 1,000 gallons an hour, and you're thinking, oh, great, it's going to give me 10 times turnover, and you're shooting for 10 times turnover, you're going to fall short. So get 2 of those. And that was the other part of the person's advice. Get 2 of those, and double what you think you need, especially if you're going to end up with cichlids, or if you're going to get larger fish. Double the turnover with the canisters. That was the advice. Now, I'll admit, an FX6 is a much sturdier, a more heavily built. It's like a battleship when it comes to canisters. I did have to replace the purge valve at the bottom of mine. I've never had to replace. Well, no, I take that back. I did have to replace a part on a Sun one time, and the impeller. I had to replace the impeller. Why did I have to replace it? Because while cleaning it, I broke off one of the little flappers. So, but I had to replace the purge valve on FX6 because it started leaking. I'd get this little puddle under the unit. So, King and Queens, thank you so much, my friend. And so at any rate, the only filter I've had to replace a part on was the FX. Fortunately, I had a 704B that I could put in place right away. So I just moved the media from the FX6 into the 704B, put it in line, waited for the part, and then put it back on. So it ended up working out fine for me because I had a spare canister. Another one of the points in my 10 tips on filtration: have a spare. Pick one up, even if it's something cheap. Have a spare so you can get it up and going. Now, downside on canisters. Look, cracking them open is a bit of a pain. Okay, it is. It's a bit of a pain. You got to pull them out. I've had friends who have back issues. Moving that FX6 without draining it is that thing weighs a ton. It's a bit of a pain. So this is why I went to the pre-filters. I started putting on pre-filters so that the amount of time between having to service them could be extended. So I put pre-filters on the intakes of my canisters so I don't have to go through that whole rigmarole, the whole process of having to break them out and open them up and all that good stuff. Now, here's a tip. Don't use 2 layers of pinky floss in an FX6 because you'll be opening up that FX6 in about 2 months. I use 1 layer of pinky floss at the very top of my FX6 so it's easy to get to. Pull it out, swap it out, drop another pre-cut piece of pinky floss in there, and that'll go 4 months or more. But I had 2 layers. I had one on the top tray and one on the bottom tray. And after about 6 weeks, the outputs were like a trickle. They were like your great grandpa at the urinal. So I laugh at my own jokes. I'm sorry. So at any rate, I like canisters. They're quiet. And you can put whatever you want in them, so they're totally flexible, and you can turn the outputs so that they break up the surface tension. So you don't need necessarily a power head or a bubbler, even though I use power heads because I love all the motion. But they do have a lot of advantages, in particular being quiet. Now, if your canister is rattling, chances are something isn't set right. If your canister has a buzz or a rattle, something isn't in place. And I know, again, using Sun as an example, if you don't have those baskets pushed in so they've snapped into place, you're going to get a rattle. And if the surface you have it on is not perfectly even, or let's say you have a cord that's under one of the feet, you're going to have a rattle. It's going to drive you crazy. So before you throw that Sun in the trash, and I have a video, by the way, called Throw That Sun in the Trash. Boy, that thing got a lot of views because of that clickbait title, right? Everybody was thinking, yeah, let's throw that trash in, throw it in the trash. I'm going to watch that video. Let's see. And then when, as I go along in the video, I say, hey, look, don't throw it in the trash. I like the Sun. It works. Just make sure that it's not user error, which is behind why you're complaining about it, right? Make sure everything is snapped into place. And another tip that somebody gave me was put some little rubber feet. And this person had this detail. I'll read the comment to you later. He said, put some of these rubber feet under the feet of the filter, and he totally quieted down so you couldn't hear nothing. Because sometimes what you're hearing is the vibration created by the canister that is using your cabinet, or your floor or your stand is using it as a bit of an echo chamber, right? So what you do is you just put some rubberized feet. Now on the sump in the tank behind me, I have a Rio, I think it's a Rio 34, 35 high flow. It's like 1,900 gallons per hour. But again, depending on how high that hose is, you're going to have what's called head pressure. So it's going to lose a certain amount of gallons per hour as it travels up to your tank. Okay, just a side note. But I contacted Reudel. I said that the vibrating of the unit at the bottom of the sump was just this constant hummed all the time. And you can get used to it, right? But I didn't want to get used to it. So Duke City Aquariums, you can get something like this. I know where you can get something like this. Underneath any one of my videos, you'll see the merch. So, and thank you. I'm glad you like it. So I talked to somebody at Reudel. I managed to figure out how to get a hold of those guys. It wasn't easy. You have to use the internet and then chat at their webpage. And thank you, Candi, for posting the merch. And what they did is they sent me this bracket that snapped onto the bottom of the Reudel pump, and it has suction cups and rubber. So it's like motor mounts. If you're familiar with motors. Denny, you can explain this. It's like a motor mount. Dennis Reudel, by the way, one of my moderators, was teaching auto mechanics in school for years. So anyway, the motor mounts are the rubberized things that kind of keep your engine from not vibrating your car to death. So now this Rio sits on this rubberized platform, and you don't hear anything. It's quiet. There's no vibration transferring from it over to the canister. So at any rate, that's my take on canisters. Now, I can't comment on other units because I haven't used them, but I know there are a lot of folks out there that love Eheim. I've had people talk to me about how they've been running an Eheim Canister Classic for 25 years. 25 years without a problem. So, hey, that's a powerful testimonial. If you look, if you look long enough and hard enough, you'll find a bad report on every product. So you'll find them out there, even on Eheim, even on Fluval, right? All of them have a bad rap, certainly on Suns. But my God, 25 years, to be running anything 25 years, continuously, 24/7, I mean, that to me is amazing engineering, okay? So now let's talk a little bit about sumps. Sumps. We've got 82 people here in the live stream. That's pretty good. I love that. Thank you so much, everybody. And Candi, yeah, be sure to hit that like button. I love that. I love the fact that we have 82 people and that you came back after last week's loss of signal, okay? How many of you watched John and Lisa's live stream on Thursday? One thing I promise you, you'll never hear cats meowing in my live stream. I feel bad for them to have this cat going through. You might hear beagles. You might hear beagles braying. That's one thing you might hear. So very quick comment on Sump. I just did a video called, on Sumps being the king of filtration. Some of you said no, and it's not the king. That's what gave me the idea. Hey, filter wars. But Sumps, I'll tell you something about Sumps. You know this already, okay? Tremendous addition of water volume. Okay, 30%, 20 to 30% added water volume. That actually is a big plus point with Sumps. Because, of course, the more water volume, the greater the amount of dilution of anything that you might have. So your parts per million, right, gets spread out over a larger ecosystem. So Sumps are great that way. They're also great because of all the crazy stuff you can do. I mean, if you watched my Sump video, I have Matten filters that are standing on end. I have 10, the equivalent of 10 Fluval FX6s worth of media in the first chamber. I have all kinds of media, all kinds of different media. And I have a Brightwell block and Brightwell NO3 cubes. I have an ATO that I have on a DIY platform that I used. I made some. I took some of those diffusers, those fluorescent light diffusers, and I made this platform. So this ATO, this automatic top off, sits in the final chamber. And the only what I'm probably going to end up doing on that Sump is I'm going to add some plants. I'm not sure if I'm going to do aquaponic plants, or maybe some people are suggesting pathos. I just put some in the final chamber, because that diffuser, the waffle, the squares in that diffuser that are holding up the automatic top off, that's a perfect place just to lay some plants, and only the bottom part of the plant is going to be in the water. They're going to rest on that diffuser that's already in there, so the roots will be able to get into the water, but the plant itself will stay up. So I could put either pathos or maybe some aquaponics in there. Whatever. What do you think? What do you think I should put in there? Aquaponic plants, lilies, things like this, or do you think I should put pathos? Something that can rest on top of the diffuser that's holding up the automatic top off, and tell me what you think. And the guy over at the plant store, he said, well, those roots, you shouldn't have them just in water. You have to pull them out every now and then and let them breathe, let them dry out a little. I don't know, And now, yet, in an ideal world, a Sump would be in a drilled tank. You would have a drilled tank, and the Sump, the overflow. Like in this case, I have an overflow box right here. This tower is an overflow box that you see right there, and then there's a drilled hole in the bottom. Now, when you look at that hole in the bottom, you can think to yourself, wait a minute, does that mean that the entire tank will drain in the event that there's a leak in the Sump? And no, the tank will drain only to the cutouts, which are at the top of this. So the tank will drain only to about right here. That's how far the tank would drain if the Sump was to bust, or if I had a plumbing failure. That's how much water I would lose, up to the cutouts, which are about right there. So you don't have to worry about your entire tank draining when you have an overflow box. Now, if you go to the Cichlid shack, James Largo, he has a massive, beautiful, massive tank in his shop, which I hope to visit someday. And the intakes for the Sump are drilled. They're just like these little posts that come out of the tank. And I think that if something went wrong and the sump started to failed and there was a leak, I think that tank would drain all the way to the bottom of those posts, unless he has some sort of safeguard in there that I'm not aware of. But that would be a catastrophic, because I think, I don't know, that thing's 300 or 500 gallons or something. Anyway, so someone said add shrimp. Yes, I have bamboo shrimp that are going into my sump. They're going to live between the first chamber and the stand-up matin filter that I picked up from Swiss Tropicals. I have a stand-up matin filter with some nice big grooves in it, and the bamboo shrimp are going to go in there. They're going to have a lot of water flow coming over them, because I found out after I picked them up and people were commenting, and I appreciate those of you who made comments about shrimp, that they are what are called fan feeders. They actually extend their fans, and they feed by using those fans. So they're going to live in that high flow area with a lot of stuff coming through, and hopefully those little bamboo shrimp will do well in that section. I have to move the matin sponge a little bit further away from the output, so they have a little bit of territory, a little bit of real estate, and the matin sponge will be supported by the 2 algae scrubbers that I have in that center section. I'll do a video on it so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So at any rate, sumps, 2 algae scrubbers, shrimp, matin Swiss tropical sponges, 2 tons of media, bright well blocks. I'm going to put plants in there with a full spectrum light. And so at any rate, sumps are tremendously practical. Now, what's the downside of sumps? The downside of sumps is if you don't really set it up correctly, if you don't have it set up right and dialed in right, and you have a pump failure, you could overflow if you don't have it set up right. You have to get your total water volume correct, so that if your pump fails and everything drains that can drain, goes to the top of the sump but doesn't overflow. That's the way mine is set up. I could have a total pump failure and I would not overflow. And the Sun 704B would still be filtering. So I have a backup there. Let's say you have a blockage. Let's say that this overflow, for some reason, became blocked. And I don't know how that could happen, almost impossible. But let's say it did. It became blocked somehow, but the pump kept pumping water into the tank. If you don't have the water amount dialed in correctly, you could overflow the tank. You could move more water into the tank that exceeds the surface, that exceeds what your tank can hold. Again, if you have the right amount of water, the total water volume is correct, you will not be able to, it'll go right to the very top, and that's what mine does. I tested it one time. If you go into my sump playlist, you'll see I shut off the pump and I let all the water drain. That was a scary video, because boy, if this overflows, I'm gonna look like an idiot. I also blocked the overflow, and I ran the pump. And again, I held my breath and I watched it come up, and then the pump ran dry, stopped moving water, and the water was exactly at the top of the tank. So if you know the correct water volume to use, and you have it dialed in, and I thank Dennis Reudel. Dennis Reudel helped me out a lot, and I also went to a lot of the reef keepers and salt websites, and YouTube channels, watched what they were doing, and that gave me a lot of confidence in being able to run a sump. This is after I set it up initially, and I made the mistake of posting a video, and people just tore me a new one, pointing out all the mistakes I had made and how I was the village sump idiot, and I took everything that they said to heart, and some of them didn't have to say it the way they said it. But hey, that's okay. Let me tell you, you put yourself out there on social media, and if someone nails you, hey, that's the risk you take, right? Okay, so downside is the fear that people have of sumps, the bad rap that and the fear, I guarantee you, is because it's something that you haven't really become completely educated in. But if you really get it, anything over 100 gallons, and some people have them on 75 gallons. I had one gentleman mention about how he has sumps on every tank, even the smaller ones. He just loves that kind of a system. So once you understand them, basically what you have is you have a big giant canister that you've put on its side, and you've got the intake here and you've got the output here, right? That's basically a sump. You've got a big sideways canister with one tube coming in here and one hose, one hose here, one hose there. That's a sump. Okay, it's really that simple. And you can flood any system can flood, right? You can have a hose come loose on a canister and have a tremendous flood. I don't know how it'd be pretty hard to flood with a hang-on back. That'd be kind of hard to have a flood. Sponge filter, you can have a flood with this. That'd be impossible, I guess, unless maybe the air hose came loose and it started to back siphon. That can happen sometimes. You can have a back siphon, and but boy, you really have to be in bad luck. So what do you think about the filters? What do you think about it? Let me hear some of your comments. Let me go back here. I am looking at your comments right now. Tell me what you think about filtration. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Sean Barwell said Pond Guru taught me a lot. Sean, he taught me a lot too. Richard Through. I really like that guy. He's a real deal. Let's see here. Candi. Jerry Martin says canisters are the bomb. I do pre-filters on every 3 months. I agree, Jerry. I mean, in the right application, canisters are awesome. I love it. And the pre-filters to some degree are a game changer. When I crack open the 302s that I have on the 60, those things are crazy clean inside. And I rinse the pre-filters every time I do a water change. So let's see here. Francie says my jokes are killing her. It's a good way to die. I have 4 kids, and they just always make fun of me. They go, you always laugh at your jokes, Dad. Let me see. Let's see here. I'm looking at your comments. I'm scrolling. Duke City is laughing out loud. Okay, King and Queens are active on the chat. Let me see here. Let's see here. Michael Everett is talking about a hang-on back overflow. You can get a hang-on back overflow system that this is basically like, it looks like a hang-on back filter, and it is essentially siphoning your tank and then putting it into a sump. So you don't need to drill the tank. You just use what's called an overflow system. You don't see them used that much these days. There's a thing called bean. I don't know why it's called this. It's called Bean Animal, and they drill the back of the tank, right? And they have this thing attached on there. It's called a bean. I think it's called Bean Animal, and it sits on the back of your tank. It's not so much an overflow because it's actually plumbed, right? It's piped. It's plumbed right into your tank, and it pulls the water out. But that does require drilling. If you don't want to drill, you can put the equivalent of a hang-on back filter called an overflow system or overflow box, and you put that on the back of your tank, and that essentially siphons your tank into a sump and then moves it back up to the moves it back up to your tank with a pump. I have one. It's made by a company called Tom's Rapids. I think it's called a Rapids Overflow. And one of the projects I have in the back of my mind is to put that overflow box on the 100. Excuse me, on the 100, and then use that. Have a DIY sump that is essentially stacked, standing up Matten filters. So I have the overflow coming into a sock, and then I have some stacked Matten filters, and then the return. And just real super simple, super simple. And because the Matten filters can also be the home for the biological bacteria. That's one of the advantages of the Matten filters, right, that you can get from Swiss Tropicals. So that is a project I have in the back of my mind. I have heard some complaints about overflows. They can lose their siphon, and then your pump will pump out the entire sump water volume into your tank. And so that can maybe be a problem, especially if you don't have the amount of water dialed in. So I have heard some bad things, but I think if you dial them in right, you don't have to worry about that. Like anything else, on the overflow box, I am going to do a lot of research and a lot of study. I'm not just going to jump in like I normally do, make a mistake, end up with 25 towels on the floor trying to sop up the water, and then figure out, okay, what did I learn? So I'm not going to do it that way this time. All right, let's see here. I'm checking out your comments. I actually have a laptop here. Is my Venusis beating up my compressor? Yeah, sometimes the Venusis asserts himself, especially after a water change. Hello, Deborah from Ontario, Canada. Let's see here. The Cichlid Shack, sponge filters are the way to go with many tanks. Now see, I take what somebody like James Largo, you get someone like James Largo who is running, I don't know how many tanks this man has, and he has a beautiful shop that he's opened up. And so, you listen to a James Largo, you listen to a Trevor O'Shea, you listen to people like this. These people know what they're saying. Corey over at the Co-op, this guy knows what he's saying. I mean, these guys they're living their life. So yeah, I take what you say to heart, Mr. Largo. And that eye biter, do you see the eye biter in the tank behind me? That's that eye biter is from that beast is from James. Okay. Caesar says, come on guys, 80 people are on the chat, 6 likes. Yeah, come on. Hey, no, we got 29 likes now. Okay, good, so I'm behind. All right, Candi is the best. King and Queen says Candi is the best. I couldn't agree with you more. Hello, Lee Peach. Matman B. I was referring to, maybe you're thinking about what I said on the air hose to an air pump that is running a sponge filter, creating a back siphon. You can have check valves. I have a check valve on this tank. I have several checks to prevent a back siphon. The checks I have are this. One, there's a small hole drilled in the output. I drilled a small hole in the output so when the pump comes up and that little blade that is pushing the water into the tank has a small hole drilled in the back of it, just below the water line. So what does that do? If there's a back siphon, if the water gets to that level, air comes in and breaks the siphon. So the water is not going to get below that hole. So that'll stop the amount of water volume that can get in the sump on a back siphon. So here I am, Mr. Over Careful. I also have a back siphon check valve that is in the hose. So the hose was cut and this back siphon unit is in there. You can see this in my sump playlist, right? And so water can only flow up to the tank with the back siphon, with that check valve. It cannot flow down. So why did I drill a hole in the output? Because sometimes those valves can fail. Sometimes they can stay open just a little bit, and just a little bit can be a lot of water. So I've tested the valve. The valve is fine. I've even taken it out of line and taken it off and cleaned it so the flaps close securely. But still, I have a double safeguard of a small hole drilled just below the water line on the output, so that if the tank were to get a back siphon going, it'll only go down to that hole. Air will go in, break the siphon, and you're okay. So I'm a little bit conservative when it comes to flooding a wood floor. All right, so let's see here. Carrie Pitt, I got here first. I have been in both streams all morning. Carrie, you are a multitasker like Candi. Okay, very good to know, and great safety system. Yes, I'm very big about not getting a lot of water everywhere. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about heaters. What do you folks think about the 5-watt? Hey, Duke City. Did I say hi to you already? Let's talk about this 5-watt per gallon rule. Do you think the 5-watt per gallon rule is valid on heaters? Two questions. Do you think 5 watts per gallon is valid? And number two, do you keep your heaters plugged in during the summer? Do you keep them on year round? Now, with heaters, I like to go with, this is where I've heard the biggest horror stories. Do you guys remember that horror story that Joey, the king of DIY, he told this horror story about losing all his fish. He had this electrical short circuit fire thing go on. And I believe I talked to the rep from Cobalt, because he had the flat cobalts. And for a while there, the Cobalt heaters were getting a bad rap because, of course, Joey has a tremendous following. And so whatever he says gets a lot of, it goes far and wide immediately, right? But I was talking to the Cobalt rep, and he told me that what Joey had was he had the Cobalt heaters. They were in a block. He had put the heaters together and somehow created this heater block, and that were somehow attached, and that's what was in the tank. I think it was in the sump or the filtration system, and somehow that overheated, short-circuited, smoked up, and actually killed all the fish. So it took Cobalt a little while to kind of recover from that, to get the actual story out, the full story. And I think Joey, he ended up saying, "Hey, look, yeah, it was on me. Here's what I did. It wasn't necessarily the Cobalt product." I like the Cobalt heaters. I have one in my 60-gallon. They're Ecotherm. Is that what they're called? Something Therm, Ecotherm, something. Biotherm, Ecotherm. Anyway, the Cobalt heaters, they're flat. They lay flat. They just lay flat against the bottom of the tank, so they don't cut into the tank much. You could pretty much, a big fish could run into them, then bang them against the side, and they're pretty indestructible. So, and they're very small. They're very compact. You can get a 300-watt heater, or a 200-watt heater, and it's like this big. Now compare that to a Eheim Jaeger. This is an Eheim Jaeger. This thing is ginormous. I have two of them in the sump, and they rest at an angle because they can't fit. They can't fit directly in there. This one is 300 watts, and I like to run two heaters for redundancy. So I had two of these beasts sitting back here. What's the advantage of this? The heat dispersal. The heat dispersal is thank you, Kevin. I'm not going to make any jokes, my friend. This is a family channel. Anyway, the heat dispersal is over a very wide area, so you do get a lot of you don't get these hot and cold spots. So in that sense, it's good. In the other sense, this is a very well-made heater. Now, for a while, Eheim was getting a bad rap. Why was that? I'll tell you why. They were outsourcing the manufacturing of their heaters to like third world countries, or even countries like China. And those countries, I mean, they're trying to make profit too. So they cut some corners, and Eheim went through a period where they were having failure. And you don't want to have a failure with a heater. If a heater blows up or a heater cooks your fish, I mean, come on, you don't want to have that happen. So what they did is they pulled it back. They pulled it back to Germany. So if you buy an Eheim Jaeger, be sure that it says on it, made in Germany. Made in Germany. Not assembled in China or assembled or made in India or anything like that. Make sure it says made in Germany, and you'll have the original Eheim quality. And this is a very good filter. This glass they use is very difficult to break. You'd have to have a very big fish bang into this very, very hard. Now, and I still don't think it would break. Now, advantage again of a sump. What's the advantage of a sump? Your heaters go into the sump. You don't see them. Disadvantage, you're not home, you have a pump failure, the heaters are in the sump, your tank chills. So maybe you keep one heater in the tank, but I don't know, if in the event of a pump failure, if you have one in the tank and one in the sump, that could solve that problem. But then you're back to having stuff in the tank that you don't want to have, and that's why you run a sump. The rep from Cobalt said, put one of the heaters on the back of the overflow tower or even inside the overflow tower, and one in the sump, and that way you still have a source of heat in the event of failure. So at any rate, I think 5 watts per gallon. So with 100 gallon, you need a 500 watts. I don't know. I've run 2 300 gallon or 2 300 watt heaters on this 150, and I've had no problem whatsoever. And I'm probably going to be replacing those with the Cobalt model, only so that they sit lower in the sump and are not sticking out of the sump. Because then when the water level in the sump would go low, I'd worry. That's one of the reasons I got that ATO, the automatic top-off system, because I didn't want the water level to get too low on the top of the heater. So now another tip, back when I used to keep discus, they say that discus would try and lay their eggs on the heater. And probably any fish would do that. Angels or something like that would try and lay their eggs on the heater. And if the heater is on, they could actually damage the part of their body, right, where the eggs are coming from. And so they could actually create actual damage, to themselves. So, and of course, kill the eggs almost immediately if the heater's on. So they suggested you take the heater and you put it sideways. Be sure it's a submersible heater, okay? I don't need to say that, right? Be sure it's submersible, and lay it low in the tank. Now you can put decor in front of it, hide the heater, have it low in the tank, and don't worry about fish laying eggs on it. Also, when it's low on the tank, when you do your water changes, you don't have to unplug your heater. The water level can go all the way down to 80%, and your heaters can stay plugged in, it doesn't matter. And so that's just a tip with these heaters. But these Eheims, I love them, but when space is a concern, I would suggest going with something like the Therm series from Cobalt. And Cobalt is not paying me to say that. If you're listening, Cobalt, send me 2 heaters, 300 watts each. Okay, so let me get your thoughts on heaters. Let's go back here. The therm heaters are very expensive. You're right. I bought an open box one from a bulk supply, and I got lucky. It was open box, worked great. Daniel says year round, turns the temperature down in the summer. Somebody mentioned controllers. Let me make a comment about controllers. I like controllers, and I'll tell you why. All you have to do is read one post from somebody who had their fish cooked by a heater, and you'll go out and get a controller. I mean, imagine your fish going up to 95 degrees. I mean, and you come home and they're all dead. What does a controller do? A controller will limit how high how hot your heater can get, and it will shut off the power, so it will not allow you to bake your fish. I have a very heavy-duty controller in the tank behind me. I picked it up. I believe it's called a wholesaler called Gemco. It cost me $100. It's expensive. They put 2 sockets into it, so I have both heaters plugged into this controller. And the controller is set at 80. I think it's set at 80 or 78. The thermostat on the heater is set at 85, and I'll tell you why. If I want to heat up the tank in the middle of an ick treatment, all I have to do is push a couple buttons on the controller, and now that lifts the top end that it will allow the heater to go to. So it makes it very easy to heat up the tank. But right now, it's cutting off the power of the heaters. When the heaters get between 78 and 80, it shuts off the power. So there's no chance of baking the fish. But if I want to increase the temperature, let's say if I had an ick break on, I want to increase the temp to break the ick cycle, all I have to do is turn the controller up to 84, and the thermostats on the heaters are already set, so it'll allow the heaters to gradually raise the temperature. So I'm a believer in controllers. I like them. I do not want to bake my fish. I don't have a controller on the smaller tanks, and some people like ink birds. You can pick up ink birds inexpensively. I don't think it's not that I don't think, I know they're not as well built as this unit I picked up from Gemco. When you look at the wiring, you look at the connectors, and you get the weight of this thing, it's incredible. So, you are going to get what you pay for, I guess, with these things, and like everything else, right? So, okay. Andrea's Herbal and Things. I have bought a 100-watt Tetra heater that is preset for 78 degrees. It works wonderfully for my 29-gallon. Good. That's a big heater for 29. That's good. And the water temp holds steady. Excellent. I'm glad that's working for you. You hear bad rap sometimes on Tetra and API products and stuff like that. But again, every company can have a defective product. I don't care who they are. Carrie Pitt wants to know if Eheim is pulling its merchandise out of North America. I don't know. That's a very interesting question for 2 reasons. One, I wonder why they would do that. And 2 is, would that mean you'd have trouble getting parts if you needed parts for an Eheim, like a canister impeller or something? I don't know. So that's a good question. I'm going to look into that. Daniel Barrett, if running 2 heaters, should the wattage of each heater be enough? I guess he means to heat the tank independently, or the wattage be cut in half. Well, I'm running 2 300s on a 150, so you would say, well, wait a minute, isn't that below the 5 watt per gallon rule? But keep in mind, the water that is being heated is the water in the sump that is passing through and past these heaters. So I think you can do a little bit less wattage when you're heating something in an enclosed compartment, like an inline heater, that is in the return hose. You know, you've spliced it into your return hose. That inline heater probably doesn't have to follow the 5 watt per gallon rule necessarily, because you have a very enclosed space that you're heating and then returning the water to. So I think if you want it to be very meticulous, sure, have two heaters and have each one able to handle the load. If you have good circulation going on and one of the heaters fails, that would definitely keep the temperature from dropping sharply, especially in one section of the tank. What do you folks think? If you have a 100-gallon aquarium and you follow the 5-gallon rule, would you have two 500-watt heaters? I don't know. I mean, I think 300 would be fine. That's just my opinion. I haven't done a scientific test on it, but I would certainly like to hear your opinion, either on this chat or after this video posts to the internet. I would like to hear your. But controllers, I think, certainly as you get into bigger tanks and you start to get into expensive stock, definitely have a controller. And I think the investment is worth it, because cooking your fish is a horrible thing unless you're going to eat them. Now, hey, by the way, if anybody here is from Southern Cal, if you are familiar with the Ventura area, Ventura, California, if you know a rockin' hot fish store around Ventura, can you please post it in the comments? I'm going to be taking a day trip up to Ventura later on today, and I've convinced my wife we can write it off on our taxes if we stop at a fish store. Actually, I probably can, because I do itemize, but I'd like to stop at I'd like to stop at a fish store in the Ventura area. If you know one, please post it. I'd like to know about them. Okay, here's a couple comments that I want to read to you. These are comments that were underneath the last live stream. And Jody Marty, don't know if Jody is in the chat. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I talked about this. He commented under the 10 filtration, my best 10 filtration tips. When buying a filter, cut the number in half that are on the box. If it says for a 100-gallon tank, it's good for a 50-gallon tank. If it says 100 gallon per hour, it actually moves 50 gallons per hour. And awesome video. Keep the great vids rolling. Jody, that I agree. I agree 100%. Whatever they tell you on the box, cut it in half. Now, that being said, hey, I hear, and if you know this is true, verify it for me. I hear that Fluval tests their filters filled with media. That's their GPH, and they'll put on the box with media and without media, GPH. Like I think the FX6 is 1,000 gallons per hour without media, but like 500 with media, or maybe more than 500 with media. So good point, Jody, and thank you for that. Rob, one thing that I have done on my FX6 is stand it on rubber mounts. Now, Rob was the person who made that comment. It's a very quiet filter by design, but it stood on a hard shelf in my cabinet and gave off a slight hum due to being in a closed cabinet, which I guess amplified the sound. That's right, your cabinet can turn into a speaker. And this has worked in the past on cheaper, louder filters as well. I use car exhaust mounting rubbers. Ford, if you see one, you'll understand why. So you go get the Ford exhaust mounting rubbers, and they cost a couple bucks and absorb the vibration very well. Not a great earth-shattering revelation, I know, but If your tank is in your living room, sometimes silence is golden. No more air pumps for me, power heads instead agitating the surface. My tank is truly silent. Regards, Rob. Thank you, Rob, for that. And I think that's a great tip. It certainly worked with my Rio pump, having it sitting on some rubber mounts and suction cups. It made it completely quiet. I don't have that constant background hum that was driving me insane. Crack 3N Junior, KRAK3N space capital JR, Kraken 3N Junior. I was wondering, I have a 29 gallon with a HOB, a hang-on back filter, and when I do water changes, do I fill the filter back up with water from my Python? Because if I don't, the pump runs forever to fill up. He didn't want to burn out his. No, you have beneficial bacteria in your hang-on back filter, so please don't go directly from tap into the hang-on back. I would suggest maybe getting in the treated water or in your tank water after you've lowered the water level and you've left some water in there. Get a couple cupfuls of tank water and fill up that hang-on back filter with the tank water. And do not use directly from the tap, directly from the Python into the hang-on back, because you will shock and possibly kill your beneficial bacteria. So let's see, one more. Brian D like David. I will never understand why people with big tanks using canisters and not pumps and not sumps. And again, this is not a knock on any of you using canisters. I have a canister on the 100. It's doing a great job. I will eventually move it over to a sump with that overflow. But he is saying that I will never understand people with big tanks using canisters and not sumps. Once I set up my first sump, I converted all my tanks to sumps. Way easier to maintain. Your tank isn't cluttered with equipment, much more room for mechanical, biological, and chemical filtration, and a whole lot less time consuming as far as maintenance. My water parameters have never been better, and I spend more time enjoying my tanks than working on them. Just a comment on sumps. Something to think about for those of you. And thank you for that, Rob. Janine said, hello from the UK. Hello, Janine. I have a freshwater community tank with fish and shrimp. All good, and ammonia cycling quickly. Then for some reason the cycle crashed, and it is now behaving like no bacteria at all. So using high dose prime in the water, or Amolock, which I guess is the ammonia lock product, and Pyrogen in the filter with daily water changes. Any clue why it crashed? Any idea how to restart the cycle? I'm pouring in 3 different types of bacteria. No used filter material available to me, but still no nitrites, no nitrates. Help. What do you folks think? What's going on with her tank? I suspect she might have maybe added fish too quickly, created too much ammonia for the bacteria to handle, and maybe killed off that bacteria somehow. Maybe she did a water change and the water wasn't treated when it went into the tank and killed off the bacteria. Some people suggest that when you're cycling a tank, don't do water changes. You want it to just leave it alone, let the ammonia get high, then let it die down, then let the nitrites get high, let them die down, then the nitrates will appear. Don't do a lot of water changes, because you want the ammonia, that's what the bacteria will feed on, and then you want the nitrites, that's what that type of bacteria will feed on, and then you'll get the nitrates, and your ammonia and your nitrites will go to zero. But people go in there and do big water changes while they're cycling the tank, and they're adding a lot of stuff as opposed to just leaving it alone. Now, what advice would you give to Janine? What advice would you do? Would you give? Yes, someone said, let nature take its course. Matman B. Yeah, let it kind of go through its process without interfering too much. I told her pull the purigen out. The purigen isn't doing anything really. Adding the beneficial bacteria from those products, that could be helping. Some people will throw a piece of shrimp, right? You've heard that style, where that cycling technique where they put a piece of shrimp, let the thing get rotten, and it'll produce a lot of ammonia, as things do when they get rotten. Add a couple black skirt tetras that are hardy. They can take a level of ammonia or nitrite. They can sort of withstand that. Put a bunch of those in there, and I don't know. I mean, once you get into that, once you get into that type of a situation of a crashed tank, it's a very difficult thing to come back from, because that ammonia is so stressful on the fish. You're going to start seeing red around the gills. You're going to start seeing erratic behavior, clasped fins, and you're going to end up with a die-off more than likely, and then you're going to start over again. So any advice you can give to Janine, post it under this video. Certainly you can post it also after it posts to YouTube. Let's give her a hand and help her out here, because we've all had something like that can be very frustrating. So for those of you that super chatted, thank you so much. Remember, any super chat that breaks Dr. Jade's record of $20 is going to receive any chat. The highest chat over 20 receives a cup. And just to thank you for the super chat. Also, for those of you, I don't know if it got posted, Kevin, if you're still there, or Denny, if you posted the GoFundMe for Candi. As you know, Candi, the superstar for chats everywhere, is going through a personal life crisis with a husband that had a heart condition, and she's also had other challenges, of course. And I hope that the link to that GoFundMe was posted. Any help that you folks can provide to Candi. She is a big, just a tremendous member of our fish keeping community. We all love all the things that that she does, and any support we can give to Candi is great. So at any rate, I think I've run way over. I was wondering if I had enough to say, and here I am. I think I'm way past what I normally go. Let's see here. Did I run over? All right, thank you so much to all of you who are in here. I see 72 people. I see 70 likes. That's awesome. That is awesome. Thank you, everybody. And at any rate, be sure to rate and comment and share, and come over to Instagram and follow there. I always post goofy stuff on Instagram. And come on over to the ben.o.cichlid. Cesar gets a mug at $24.99. Cesar, gracias amigo. Thank you, my friend. And you're going to be getting a mug. And I think I already have your address. If I don't, just to be sure, send me your address. ben.o.cichlid at gmail.com. ben.o.cichlid. Thank you, my friend. I'm sending you a mug. And so thank you, everybody. That's it for me for now. And what can I say? We all learn from each other. Don't ever forget that. We all learn from each other. The stupidest fish keeper is the one that thinks they know everything. That is the stupidest fish keeper. We all learn from each other. And you rock, my friend. Bye-bye.